Yeah, well, I've read Perfume by Patrick Suskind about 10 times in my life, and I can't stop reading it. It's like something that's just stationary in my pocket all the time. It just doesn't leave me, and every time I'm bored, like I'm on an airplane or something, I read it over and over again. Because I'm a hypochondriac, and it just affects me. Yeah.
So I don't know if I accidentally came across that video or if I heard somebody talking about this book. But today, when I found it, it took me a few minutes to register because I'm pretty sure I have another book about perfume, which may be the history of perfume, but I don't know. And I don't mean this. I mean the actual history of perfume. But this is Patrick Suskind's Perfume, and people have raved about it. Namely, I assume that its notoriety came from Kurt Cobain's love of the book, or at least obsession with it. Is this guy still alive? Yes, he's living in Munich. Pigeon, my Mr. Summers story. Perfume, the story of a murder by Patrick Suskind. Oh, what year was this? Originally published in German as Das Parfum, translated from the German by John E. Woods. Not Johnny, John E. Looks like 1986. Is that the original? When did Cobain die? It's 1985. So it's somewhere in the 85, 86 region of time. Let's see how many pages I get here in 30 minutes. I assume it's a couple sections. 1. In 18th century France, there lived a man who was one of the most gifted personages in an era of personages. His story will be told here. His name was Jean Baptiste Grenouille. Gives a person this name? Grenouille. And if his name is contrast to the names of other gifted abominations, Desade's, for instance, or Saint Just's, Fouches, Bonaparte's, etc., has been forgotten today. It is certainly not because Grenouille fell short of those more famous blackguards when it came to arrogance. Misanthropy, immorality, or more succinctly, to wickedness, but because his gifts and his sole ambition were restricted to a domain that leaves no traces in history, to the fleeting realm of ascent. In the period of which we speak, there reigned in the cities a stench barely conceivable to us modern men and women. The streets stank of manure, the courtyards of urine, the stairwells stank of moldering wood and rat droppings, the kitchens of spoiled cabbage and mutton fat. The unaired parlors stank of stale dust. The bedrooms of greasy sheets, damp feather beds, and the pungently sweet aroma of chamber pots. The stench of sulfur rose from the chimneys, the stench of caustic lies from the tanneries, and from the slaughterhouses came the stench of congealed blood. People stank of sweat and unwashed clothes. From their mouths came the stench of rotting teeth, from their bellies that of onions, and from their bodies, if they were no longer very young, came the stench of rancid cheese and sour milk and tumorous disease. The rivers stank, the marketplaces stank, the churches stank. It stank beneath the bridges and in the palaces. The peasant stank as did the priest, the apprentice as did his master's wife. The whole of the aristocracy stank, even the king himself stank. Stank like a rank lion, and the queen like an old goat. summer and winter. For in the 18th century, there was nothing to hinder bacteria busy at decomposition. And so there was no human activity, either constructive or destructive, no manifestation of germinating or decaying life that was not accompanied by stench. And of course, the stench was fouler in Paris, for Paris was the largest city of France, and in turn there was a spot in Paris under the sway of a particularly fiendish stench between the Rue Orfèvre and the Rue de la Ferronnerie. I don't know how to say it. Ferrani. The Cimetière des Innocents, to be exact. For 800 years, the dead had been brought here from the Hotel G and from the surrounding parish churches. For 800 years, day in, day out, corpses by the dozens had been carted here and tossed into long ditches, stacked bone upon bone for 800 years in the tombs and charnel houses. Only later, on the eve of the revolution, after several of the grave pits had caved in and the stench had driven the swollen graveyard's neighbors to more than mere protest and to actual insurrection, was it finally closed and abandoned. Millions of bones and skulls were shoveled into the catacombs of Montmartre, and in its place a food market was erected. Here, then, on the most putrid spot in the whole kingdom, Jean Baptiste Grenouille was born on July 17th, 1738. It was one of the hottest days of the year. The heat lay leaden upon the graveyard, squeezing in putrefying vapor, a blend of rotting melon and the fetid odor of burnt animal horn. Out into the nearby alleys, when the labor pains began, Grenouille's mother was standing at a fish stall in the Rue aux Fers, scaling whiting that she had just gutted. The fish, ostensibly taken that very morning from the Seine, already stank so vilely that the smell masked the odor of the corpses. Grenouille's mother, however, perceived the odor neither of the fish nor of the corpses, for her sense of smell had been utterly dulled. Besides which her belly hurt, and the pain deadened all susceptibility to sensate impressions. A reading from Perfume by Patrick Suskind. She only wanted the pain to stop. She wanted to put this revolting birth behind her as quickly as possible. It was her fifth. She had affected all the others here at the fish booth, and all had been stillbirths or semi-stillbirths, for the bloody meat that emerged had not differed greatly from the fish guts that lay there already, nor had lived much longer, and by the evening the whole mess had been to the graveyard or down to the river. It would be much the same this day. And Grenouille's mother, who was still a young woman, barely in her mid-20s, and who still was quite pretty and had almost all her teeth in her mouth, and some hair on her head, and except for gout and syphilis and a touch of consumption, suffered from no serious disease, who still hoped to live a while yet, perhaps a good 5 or 10 years, and perhaps even to marry one day, and as the honorable wife of a widower with a trade or some such, to bear real children. Grenouille's mother wished that it was already over, and when the final contractions began, she squatted down under the gutting table, and there gave birth, as she had done 4 times before, and cut the newborn thing's umbilical cord with her butcher knife. But then, on account of the heat and the stench, which she did not perceive as such, but only as an unbearable, numbing something, like a field of lilies or a small room filled with too many daffodils, she grew faint, toppled to one side, fell out from under the table into the street, and lay there, knife in hand. Tumult and turmoil. The crowd stands in a circle around her, staring. Someone hails the police. The woman with the knife in her hand is still lying in the street. Slowly she comes to. What has happened to her? Nothing. What is she doing with that knife? Nothing. Where does the blood on her skirt come from? From the fish. She stands up, tosses the knife aside, and walks off to wash. And then, unexpectedly, the infant under the gutting table begins to squall. They have a look, and beneath a swarm of flies and amid the offal, and fish heads, they discovered the newborn child. They pull it out, and as prescribed by law, they give it to a wet nurse and arrest the mother. And since she confesses openly, admitting that she would definitely have let the thing perish, just as she had with those other four, by the way, she is tried, found guilty of multiple infanticide, and a few weeks later decapitated at the Place de Grève. By the time the child had already changed wet nurses 3 times, no one wanted to keep it for more than a couple of days. It was too greedy, they said, sucked as much as 2 babies, deprived the other sucklings of milk, and them, the wet nurses, of their livelihood, for it was impossible to make a living nursing just 1 babe. The police officer in charge, a man named Lafosse, instantly wearied of the matter and wanted to have the child sent to a halfway house for foundlings and orphans at the far end of the Rue Saint Antoine, from which transports of children were dispatched daily to the great public orphanage in Rouen. But since these convoys were made up of porters who carried bark baskets into which, for reasons of economy, up to 4 infants were placed at a time, since therefore the mortality rate on the road was extraordinarily high, since for that reason the porters were urged to convey only baptized infants, and only those furnished with an official certificate of transport, to be scamped upon arrival in Rouen, since the babe Grenouille had neither been baptized nor received even so much as a name, to inscribe officially on the certificate of transport, since, moreover, it would not have been good form for the police anonymously to set a child at the gates of the halfway house, which would have been the only way to dodge the other formalities. Thus, because of a whole series of bureaucratic and administrative difficulties that seemed likely to occur if the child were shunted aside, and because time was short as well, Officer Lafosse revoked his original decision and gave instructions for the boy to be handed over on written receipt to some ecclesiastical institution or other, so that there they could baptize him and decide his further fate. He got rid of him at the cloister of Saint Mary in the Rue Saint Martin. There they baptized him with the name Jean Baptiste, and because on that day the prior was in a good mood, and the eleemosynary fund, whatever that is, eleemosynary fund not yet exhausted, they did not have the child shipped to Rouen, but instead pampered him at the cloister's expense. To this end, he was given to a wet nurse named Jean Bussy, who lived in the Rue Saint Denis, and was to receive, until further notice, 3 francs per week for her trouble. So far, not bad. I was skeptical that it would be a readable book, but so far it has been pleasantly readable. A few weeks later, the wet nurse Jean Bussy stood, market basket in hand, at the gates of the cloister of Sainte Marie, and the minute they were opened by a bank monk of about 50 with a light odor of vinegar about him. Father Terrier, she said, there, and set her market basket down on the threshold. What's that? Said Terrier, bending down over the basket and sniffing at it in the hope that it was something edible. The bastard of that woman from the Rue aux Fers who killed their babies. The monk poked about in the basket with his finger till he had exposed the face of the sleeping infant. He looks good, rosy pink. I lost my spot. Rosy pink and well nourished, because he stuffed himself on me, because he's pumped me dry down to the bones. But I've got but I've put a stop to that. Now you can feel him yourselves. With goat's milk, with pap, with beer juice. He'll gobble up anything, that bastard will. Father Ture was an easygoing man. Among his duties was the administration of the cloister's charities, the distribution of its monies to the poor and needy, and for that he expected a thank you, and that he not be bothered further. He despised technical details because details meant difficulty, and difficulties meant ruffling his composure, and he simply would not put up with that. He was upset that he had even opened the gate. He wished that this female would take her marker basket and go home and let him alone with her suckling problems. Slowly he straightened up, and as he did, he breathed the scent of milk and cheese, wool exuded by the wet nurse. It was a pleasant aroma. I don't understand what it is you want. I really don't understand what you're driving at. I can only presume that it would certainly do no harm to this infant if he were to spend a good while yet lying at your breast. None to him, the wet nurse snarled back, but plenty to me. I've lost 10 pounds and been eating like I was 3 women. And for what? For 3 francs a week? I understand, said Terrier, almost relieved. I catch your drift. Once again, it's a matter of money. No, said the wet nurse. Of course it is. It's always a matter of money. When there's a knock at this gate, it's a matter of money. Just once, I'd like to open it and find someone standing there for whom it was a matter of something else. Someone, for instance, with some little show of thoughtfulness. Fruit, perhaps, or a few nuts. After all, in autumn there are lots of things someone could come by with. Flowers, maybe, or if only someone would simply come and say a friendly word. God bless you, Father Terrier. I wish you a good day, but I'll probably never live to see it happen. If it isn't a beggar, it's a merchant, and if it isn't a merchant, it's a tradesman, and if it isn't alms he wants, then he presents me with a bill. I can't even go out into the street anymore. When I go out on the street, I can't take 3 steps before I'm hedged in by folks wanting money. Not me, said the wet nurse, but I'll tell you this. You aren't the only wet nurse in the parish. There are hundreds of excellent foster mothers who would scramble for the chance of putting this charming babe to their breast for 3 francs a week, or to supply with pap or juices or whatever nourishment. Supply him with pap or juices or whatever nourishment. Then give him to one of them. On the other hand, it's not good to pass a child around like that. Who knows if he would flourish as well on someone else's milk as on yours. He's used to the smell of your breast, as you surely know, and to the beat of your heart. And once again he inhaled deeply of the warm vapors streaming from the wet nurse. But then, noticing that his words had made no impression on her, he said, "Now take the child home with you. I'll speak to the prior about all this. I shall suggest to him that in the future you be given 4 francs a week." "No," said the wet nurse. "All right, 5. No. How much more do you want then?" Terrier shouted at her. 5 francs is a pile of money for the menial task of feeding a baby. "I don't want any money, period," said the wet nurse. "I want this bastard out of my house." "But why, my good woman?" said Terrier, pointing his finger in the basket again. "He really is an adorable child. He's rosy pink, he doesn't cry, and he's been baptized. He's possessed by the devil." Terrier quickly withdrew his finger from the basket. "Impossible. It is absolutely impossible for an infant to be possessed by the devil. An infant is not yet a human being. It is a pre-human being and does not yet possess a fully developed soul. Which is why it is of no interest to the devil Can he talk already, perhaps? Does he twitch and jerk? Does he move things about in the room? Does some evil stench come from him? He doesn't smell at all, said the wet nurse. And there you have it. That is a clear sign. If he were possessed by the devil, then he would have to stink. And to soothe the wet nurse and to put his own courage to the test, Terrier lifted the basket and held it up to his nose. I smell absolutely nothing out of the ordinary, he said, after he had sniffed for a while. Really nothing out of the ordinary, though it does appear as if there's an odor coming from his diapers, and he held out the basket. This fucking phone. Come on. And he held out his basket to her so that she could confirm his opinion. That's not what I mean, she said, the wet nurse, shoving the basket away. I don't mean what's in the... His soil smells. That's true enough, but it's the bastard himself. He doesn't smell. Because he's healthy, Terrier cried. Because he's healthy. That's why he doesn't smell. Only sick babies smell. Everyone knows that. It's well known that a child with the pox smells like horse manure, and one with scarlet fever like old apples, and a consumptive child smells like onions. He is healthy. That's all that's wrong with him. Do you think he should stink? Do your own children stink? No, said the wet nurse. My children smell like human children ought to smell. Terrier carefully placed the basket back on the ground, for he could sense rising with him the first waves of his anger at this obstinate female. It was possible that he would need to move both arms more freely as the debate progressed, and he didn't want the infant to be harmed in the process. But for the present, he nodded his hands behind his back, shoved his tapering belly toward the wet nurse, and asked sharply, You maintain, then, that you know how a human child, which, may I remind you, once it is baptized, is also a child of God, is supposed to smell? Yes, said the wet nurse, and you further maintain that if it does not smell the way you, the wet nurse, Jean Bussy, from the Rue Saint Denis, think it ought to smell, it is therefore a child of the devil? He swung his left hand out from behind his back and menacingly held the question mark of his index finger in her face. The wet nurse thought it over. She was not happy that the conversation had all at once turned into a theological cross-examination, in which she could only be the loser. That's not what I meant to say, she answered evasively. You, priest, will have to decide whether all this has anything to do with the devil or not, Father Terrier. That's not for such as me to say. I only know one thing. This baby makes my flesh creep because it doesn't smell the way children ought to smell. Aha, said Terrier with satisfaction, letting his arm swing away again. You retract all that about the devil, do you? Good. But now be so kind as to tell me, what does a baby smell like when he smells the way you think he ought to smell? Well? He smells good, said the wet nurse. What do you mean, good? Terrier bellowed at her. Lots of things smell good. A bouquet of lavender smells good. Stew meat smells good. The gardens of Arabia smell good. But what does a baby smell like is what I want to know. The wet nurse hesitated. She knew very well how babies smell. She knew precisely. After all, she had fed, tended, cradled, and kissed dozens of them. She could find them at night with her nose. Why? Right at that moment, she bore that baby smell clearly in her nose. But never until now had she described it in words. Well, Bart Terrier, clicking his fingernails impatiently, the wet nurse began, it's not all that easy to say, because they don't smell the same all over, although they smell good all over. Father, you know what I mean. Their feet, for instance, they smell like a smooth, warm stone, or no, more like curds, or like butter, like fresh butter. That's it exactly. They smell like fresh butter, and their bodies smell like a griddle cake that's been soaked in milk, and their heads up on top at the back of the head, where the hair makes a cowlick. There, see where I mean? Farther. There, father. Farther, father. There, where you've got nothing left, and she tapped the bald spot on the head of the monk, who, struck speechless for a moment by this flood of detailed inanity, had obediently bent his head down. There, right there, is where they smell best of all. It smells like caramel. It smells so sweet, so wonderful, father. You have no idea. Once you've smelled them, there, you love them, whether they're your own or somebody else's. And that's how little children have to smell, and no other way. And if they don't smell like that, if they don't have any smell at all up there, even less than cold air does, like that little bastard there, then you can explain it however you like, father. But I, and she crossed her arms resolutely beneath her bosom and cast a look of disgust toward the basket at her feet as if it contained toads. I, Jean Bussy, will not take that thing back. Father Thierry slowly raised his lower head and ran his fingers across his bald head a few times as if hoping to put the hair in order, passed his finger beneath his nose as if by accident, and sniffed thoughtfully. Like caramel? He asked, attempting to find his stern tone again. Caramel? What do you know about caramel? Have you ever eaten any? Not exactly, said the wet nurse, but once I was in a grand mansion in the Rue Saint Honore and watched how they made it out of melted sugar and cream. It smelled so good that I've never forgotten it. Yes, all right, said Terrier, and took his finger from his nose. But please hold your tongue now. I find it quite exhausting to continue a conversation with you on such a level. I have determined that for whatever reason you refuse to nourish any longer the babe put under your care, Jean Baptiste Grenouille, and are returning him herewith to his temporary guardian, the cloister of Saint Marie. I find that distressing, but I apparently cannot alter the fact. You are discharged. With that, he grabbed the basket, took one last whiff of that fleeting, woolly, warm milkiness, and slammed the door. Then he went to his office. I'll grant you, those were two pretty good sections there. So far, I don't give it a thumbs down. It's unusual for me. It's got an intriguing allure to it. How many pages is this book? 233? I'll have to put this on the reading list. I'll give this a thumbs up. Kurt Cobain isn't always wrong. Let's hear Kurt again. Talk, Kurt. Kurt? Kurt's got nothing to say. Kurt!
Yeah, well, I've read Perfume by Patrick Suskind about 10 times in my life, and I can't stop reading it. It's like something that's just stationary in my pocket all the time. It just doesn't leave me, and every time I'm bored, like I'm on an airplane or something, I read it over and over again. Because I'm a hypochondriac, and it just affects me.
Yeah. So yeah. That's Perfume. The first two sections. I will definitely pursue this. But I will wait till 30 minutes is up before I close this video. Let's hear and listen to Cobain again.
Yeah, well, I've read Perfume by Patrick Suskind about 10 times in my life, and I can't stop reading it. It's like something that's just stationary in my pocket all the time. It just doesn't leave me, and every time I'm bored, like I'm on an airplane or something, I read it over and over again. Because I'm a hypochondriac, and it just affects me. Yeah, well...
Yeah.
I've read Perfume.
I don't like how he said that at all. But that's it.